You have most certainly watched a movie where there's a Chinese mentor, teacher, or master in some sort of way. The figure of Shifu is commonly seen in mainstream Western films of today. But does he actually have a voice? And can his Chinese student have a voice that truly transcends the stereotypes and the cliches of Hollywood, putting him at the center of a great new story? Before we can answer all these questions, there is one more question that we need to address first. Have Chinese male characters ever truly had a voice in Western films? My name is Kevin, and today with me is also my groupmate Giorgio. Here's our video essay called Present But Never the Center: Chinese Masculinity Across Western Films. He does not speak. When he speaks, no one listens. When he teaches, it's not even his story. This video examines 3 different versions of the same man across 3 widely popular Western films: The Good Earth in 1937, Rush Hour 2 in 2001, and Karate Kid: Legends 2025. 3 different versions of the same man. At first, it looks like a change, but if you look a lot closer, it starts to feel sort of like repetition. You also notice something a little unusual about how we've presented the Chinese male characters. We've literally cut them out of their original film scenes with torn, sticker-like borders and placed them against a black background. The rest of the world, the other actors, the settings, the stories, is pushed into the distance or faded behind them. We promise you, this is not some trendy TikTok trend. It's a visual representation of our main argument. Because Chinese masculinity in Western cinema is consistently made present, but never allowed to be the center. Although we might not fully capture the entire story and all sorts of ways in which Chinese men have been represented in film, they can give us some hints because every one of them was very popular in the West at respective times. While these 3 films cannot capture every portrayal of Chinese men on screen, each was extremely popular in the West at the time of its release and offers clear insight into recurring patterns. The truth is that, well, before the popularization of martial arts movies, instead of passing down their wisdom, Chinese men had a much more passive voice. The Good Earth was a novel written by Pearl Buck in 1931, later adapted into a film in 1937. It is widely considered to have crucially shaped how Americans see Chinese people. It tells a story of Hoang, a farmer who later becomes a landowner. In the movie The Good Earth, Hoang barely speaks, not because he has nothing to say, but because the film doesn't even allow him to matter through speech. His masculinity is constructed merely on sheer labor, through endurance and through survival. He works and works and works. And then he provides, and yet he continues to persist and persist and persist. But he does not get to define the world around him. He is merely living in it and is forced to adapt to his circumstances. Even in moments that should feel emotional, the Asian male does not allow it. The day he gets married, his first moments in fatherhood, losing a dear loved one, are flattened into simple human function. And when a crisis comes, he doesn't confront his emotions. He doesn't even confront the crisis. He merely lives it and absorbs it and holds it there. His silence becomes his only presence, but a presence without disruption. He exists, but he does not dare intervene. He endures, but he does not even imagine of dreaming, as this is a mere fairy tale. Hoang wasn't silenced because his struggles weren't shown in the movie, rather because they were too narrow to fully capture the reality of Chinese struggle in 1930s, and also because they weren't shown with a melancholic tone. More closely, he was representing stereotypes that were subverted with sarcasm throughout the narrative. A prominent Chinese author at the time, Shi Shengqian, deeply criticized The Good Earth, as he believed that Pearl Buck had transplanted the American dream onto a Chinese context shoe. He said that Wang Lung was totally apolitical and unaware of the situation in China. This is, he noticed, there was a big gap between the Chinese reality and Chinese representation. And this is the main reason why he wrote English, because he wanted to offer the West a different perspective on China and the crisis that was happening there. At this point of the story, China was a new republic under the rule of the KMT, shifting to the far right after the death of Sun Yat-sen. This part of Chinese historical context was ignored by Pearl Buck, who instead reproduced a phenomenon called Orientalism, as coined by the scholar Edward Said. In a 1998 interview, he talked about the book he wrote about this term that refers to Western representation of the East. Speaking from his lived experiences as an Arab male, he described it as unrealistic.
The East is a kind of mysterious place full of secrets and monsters. You know, the marvels of the East was a phrase that was used. And the more I looked, the more I saw that this was really quite consistent with itself. You know, it had very little to do with people who had actually been there.
This is a very similar pattern to the one that Xi Jinping identified in The Good Earth. The problem was that the United States saw China through Pearl Buck's lens, and it took it as a perfect depiction of the current Chinese male experience. Her perspective was not entirely wrong, but it only encompassed her memories from where she lived in China as a child. A very different reality from that which was currently happening. The struggle was not only against poverty, but also political. And the disconnection grew because in the decades that followed the publication of The Good Earth, Buck became one of America's most prominent voices on all things Chinese. During this period, Chinese men were seen as future Christians, consumers, or citizens fighting against poverty. As Shu describes, it was billed as an authentic tale of a distant, wine-swept China, but its author was a white American, and it told the kind of story that Americans grappling with the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl wanted to hear, of hard work, perseverance, and triumph in the face of natural disaster and corruption. That said, never mentioning current dynamics such as Chinese leftist writers' struggles under the KMT rule, and the many different ideologies that a good portion of the youth believed in. For example, caused Orientalism to spread, and this disconnection between the American common sense and the complex reality that was 1930s, China ended up silencing the voices of many Chinese men, including Xi Jinping and Wang Lung himself, and certainly many women voices remained hidden from the West as well. But that is beyond the scope of this video.
Hey, this is Giorgio, and I'm here to show you that not all hope is lost. This narrow perspective did not disappear over time, but eventually it did evolve. By the turn of the century, silence had given way to visibility. In Rush Hour 2, Detective Lee, played by Jackie Chan, speaks, fights, and demonstrates clear competence and discipline. Yet, he is consistently interrupted or overshadowed by his American partner.
Come on out here.
Get off the stage.
Are you crazy, man? I'm a star. I'm a god to these people. Come check this out.
This is a gangster bar. We are here undercover.
I knew you was lying. I knew you was lying, man.
I'm sorry, Carter.
You a liar.
Mastery is transformed into spectacle, often undercut by immediate jokes and set aside as more of the comedic relief. He wins fights with his impressive karate, but rarely controls the narrative. He acts within the story, but does not ever direct it. If Wang Lung was defined by not speaking, Lee would be defined by speaking what he has to speak. His masculinity is now clear, but it remains set on defined expectations to be strong and know martial arts. This is a stereotype that many Chinese men are pressured to follow, but the film fails to show that most of them will not fulfill these expectations. He also remains apolitical, but his strength overshines his past struggles. This shift from invisibility to a visible but contained presence still suffers from the echoes of Xi Jinping's argument that Western representations transplant the American dream onto Chinese subjects, producing comforting, legible images that reassure Western audiences while stripping away authentic voice and political agency. Rush Hour 2 is a perfect example of how Hollywood grants the Chinese male figure visibility and physical capability in martial arts, but only as entertaining support for a more Hollywood-style protagonist centrality. This is closer to repositioning than progress. Chinese masculinity is granted a presence, but not the power to disrupt or redefine the narrative itself, and not enough attention is brought to the pressure to conform. And these expectations are closer to what Asian nationalist Frank Chin used to defend around the 1960s. But the American narrative from before was that Chinese men were passive, obedient, and even non-masculine. Juliette Ledru says, in the face of such misogynist and often homophobic definitions of masculinity, queer Asian Americans meet the difficult challenge to conform neither to the Chinese identity that American representations offer, nor to one envisioned by Asian nationalists such as Frank Chin. This highlights that neither passiveness and hypermasculinity capture the full scope of what it means to be a Chinese man. In Karate Kid Legends, premiered in 2025, the Chinese male figure appears to reach a new level of respect. Mr. Han, played by Jackie Chan, is calm, wise, and authoritative. He teaches and guides rather than proving himself through action. Mr. Han is finally respected and given space to speak wisdom. Yet even here, his role is to enable the protagonist's transformation, not to undergo his own.
Chinese saying, friend's problem is my problem. We will find a way to help.
And the main character, Li Fong, is a young Chinese male. His personal perspective is shown in more depth throughout the film. The way he blames himself for not being able to protect his brother who was murdered after a kung fu tournament is a good representation of the masculine pressure to be strong. It remains stereotypical due to it being related to martial arts, but by showing his growth, the movie was finally able to capture his voice. However, it still had to fit in a stereotypical Hollywood cliché about martial arts. In the end, it's clearly evident from these movies that Chinese men's portrayal in Western cinema, in fact, in Western society, isn't just changing in a linear path or being revolutionized. The stereotypical passive character working on a farm of Wan Lung in The Good Earth, the humorous yet wise male figure with a thick English accent in Detective Lee in Rush Hour 2, and the sage martial arts instructor in Karate Kid Legends, played by the same actor as well as the student in the last movie, they are all examples of how portrayals may seem to have improved, but these changes do not always represent a complete break from stereotype. Rather, they show how Chinese masculinity is consistently reworked by Western media in ways that are still understandable and comfortable to Western viewers. This pattern closely echoes Edward Said's concept of Orientalism, whereby the West constructs the East as its other to affirm its own cultural dominance and superiority. Chinese male characters are almost invariably cast in roles that deny them the agency to define themselves, instead serving as projections of Western anxieties, desires, or ideological needs. In this way, representation involves control. The voice of Chinese male characters is nevertheless filtered in a Western narrative that comes with Western expectations. However, academics like Juliette Ledru make compelling arguments that creatively undermine this narrative by demonstrating the dynamic nature of Chinese masculinity by criticizing such expectations. This implication suggests that there are new venues where these identities are being questioned, reshaped, and are moving forward in the right direction. The box office movies are still relying on stereotypical narratives, but more complexity has been added to them, and this is good to broaden how the West views Chinese men. This also reflects how Chinese identity has been historically positioned within a universal hierarchy, and also how this could be slowly changing for the better. Earlier in the video, Kevin asked the question, have Chinese male characters ever had a voice? The answer is yes, but it took a long time. The answer is yes, but Chinese people have not been able to tell their own stories. So a true video title was never meant to say present, but never the center, but rather central, but never the ones telling the story. Recognizing this tension is pivotal to understanding the ongoing relationship between China and the world, particularly in the realm of cultural production. Thank you so much for watching, and please leave a like if we made you think.